Hello, we are live. Welcome to this month's Monero Meet. Sorry for my weird voice. I'm sick, but luckily it's not COVID, so whatever. Uh, but yeah, it's been 2 months since we've had a Monero Meet, so we have lots of catching up to do. But we have some wonderful people on. Some people are still doing the thing where they join at the last minute here. But I'm gonna, let me know to make sure that the quality is coming through just fine. If it's not, let me know in chat. But Monero meets are supposed to be pretty casual, where we can answer questions, talk about recent Monero news, what's going on in the future, all that sorts of fun stuff. But first, we could do the intros like we do as always. So, hello, it's me, Justin. I just do a bunch of random stuff. I'm here. We also have Arctic Mind.
Hello, I'm here.
Welcome, Arctic Mind. Nice to have you. We have HYC.
It's a pleasure.
Hey.
Welcome back, HYC. We have Andres.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome. We have Plausoff.
Hello, everyone.
And coming, if their audio works, Co.
Hello, I'm here.
There you go. Perfect. So we have a really good group of people on to talk about all sorts of Monero of stuff today. We have quite a few things that have happened in the last 2 months. I mean, just going through the list, right? We had the DEF CON cryptocurrency village, which we didn't even have a chance to talk about. I won't talk about too much today, but I would say that largely was a success. So if you are interested in that more, you could go to Monero events on Matrix and talk about that. We also had, of course, the news, the big news events were that Fluffy Pony was arrested based on allegations of wire fraud, and then he was released in the U.S. So he's currently out again, based off South Africa's inability to provide required documents in time. And we have all sorts of other fun stuff going on too. But I think it would be good to start with you, HYC. So over the last month, there's been a really big push to have a peer-to-peer pool mining Monero. And so this can be found on p2pool.io. And I checked this morning, and it's now up to 3% of the Monero hash rate. Can you give it just a quick overview of what P2 pool is, why it matters for Monero, why this is so cool? Give us a rundown.
Sure, it's like combining the best of both worlds between pooled mining and solo mining, right? Because you get to join your hash rate with other miners like you do in a pool, but every miner constructs their own block template, block headers, and they mine their own blocks. So it's like solo mining. And the reason this is important is it means there's no single entity in control of all of the blocks being generated, right? So even if P2 pool gets popular enough to have over 50% of that network hash rate, there's actually no danger of a 51% attack because each block is still being generated by individual miners. And all of this work is, this code was written from scratch by S. Chernik, although the idea for P2 pool, was already around in Bitcoin. Like, just like other things that Monero has adopted, that first came out for Bitcoin, but either didn't make it there or were never adopted. So Bitcoin's P2 pool had a big problem in that it was always, there's a high frequency of orphaned blocks, right? The way P2 pool works is everybody is mining on a side chain, and the rate of blocks on the side chain is much faster than the main chain. It could be 1 every 10 seconds, 1 every 30 seconds, whatever, compared to 1 every 10 minutes for the Bitcoin main chain. And when you're emitting blocks that fast, there's going to be a lot of tendency for multiple miners to collide and cause chain forks on the side chain. And so in Bitcoin's P2 pool, when that happens, whichever block loses on the reorg, it's just wasted hash rate. And S. Chernik fixed this in the Monero implementation by adopting what he calls uncle blocks. So uncles are parents, uncles of the orphan blocks, and they allow some value of the orphan blocks to be retained. In this case, I think it's 20%. So not all of that hash rate is wasted. And this way we can still maintain a very fast block rate on the side chain, which I think in the current one is one every 10 seconds. While
So
while
all
still
I'm hearing is that we've made Monero into Ethereum. Is what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
That's right. We adopted the uncle block technique from Ethereum. That's right. But I mean, you can't say we made Monero Ethereum.
You heard it
Anyway,
here
so
first.
this has been working out really well. In fact, we had 1% of the Monero network hash rate within the first week of our testing. So it's actually been meeting and exceeding our expectations. It's been some cool stuff.
No, that's fantastic. I'm glad that every time I check, it's just more and more of the hash rate, and it's not like Monero's hash rate's decreasing much. It's still a general trend up. So it's clearly gotten a lot of people's interest, and it's great that it's it's seemingly worked out so well so far. Would you agree, or do you think that there's still quite a few bugs that need to be fixed?
No, in the past week or so, it's been working really smoothly. We of course had some hiccups in the first 1 or 2 weeks of testing. But actually, the initial test on testnet went pretty smoothly, and then we transitioned to mainnet with just a small handful of participants. And now we've opened up to the network at large. It's been working really well. And so some of these other benefits that I forgot to mention, there is no custodial pool wallet, right? Every payout comes directly from the Coinbase transaction of a Monero block. So there's no way that anybody else can run away with the funds or do an exit scam on you.
I saw that it says that only certain wallets support the P2P payouts, and this is the wallets that most people support. So what's the backstory behind that? Why might some wallets not properly show a payout?
So there was a quote optimization unquote that was added to the wallet code back when I think back when Ring CT was first introduced, and that optimization was that for any transactions that were newer than the original CryptoNote transactions, which had multiple outputs, it would only look at one output in the Coinbase transaction. And so,
Okay.
and so now, since P2 Pool is paying out every individual miner in the Coinbase transaction, the Coinbase transaction can have 30, 40, or hundreds of outputs in it now. And so with the old optimization in place, a wallet would only see the first output and ignore all the rest of them. Now that was patched in the latest 17.2.3 release. So the CLI was updated immediately. I think both Monero and Cake Wallet have now been updated. If there's any other third-party wallets, I'm not aware of them.
Does this mean that all users are scanning all the outputs in the Coinbase?
Well, they always were. It's just that usually there was only one to look at.
Got it. Yeah, that's an interesting optimization that I totally forgot about.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I should note that because the Coinbase transaction is not, it has none of the privacy technologies on it, you can actually do this. The limitation on bulletproofs of 16 outputs wouldn't apply, because there is a built-in limitation for regular transactions where you wouldn't be able to have 30 outputs on a Monero transaction, but because it's a Coinbase transaction, this works.
That's right. On the other thing, that Arctic Mind just touched on, the outputs in the Coinbase transaction are not encrypted, right? So there's no privacy on those. So one of the things about this is you should be P2 pool mining to a separate dedicated mining wallet.
Got it. Andres, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question for H1C. If you can explain a bit more, what's the role of pools in peer-to-peer mining compared to the regular pools that we are used to use?
Well,
because it's almost like a very decentralized mining system. So people sometimes ask why what was the role of the pool itself?
The pool is, I mean, it's not really a pool, right? It's an entire side blockchain, right? And basically, the blockchain there is recording all of the shares that miners submit. And there's a window. There's a sliding window across these blocks, which determines who gets paid. If a main chain Monero block is found, and your shares are within the current window, then you'll get a payout in that block.
And there's only one of those chains, and there can be multiple chains.
Oh, there can be as many as you like. I mean, it's just like there can be many pools.
Yeah, but what's the? I mean, what are the pros and cons of having one or several or too many pools or too many chains like that?
I don't really think there's such a thing as too many chains, just like there's no such thing as too many pools, right? The trade-off is that the more pools there are, then the smaller the hash rate per pool there can be, and the smaller the hash rate, then the longer it takes to find a main chain block.
Yeah, eventually it tends to solo mining, basically.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
There is a trade-off here also, in that the amount of outputs that you put out per block. So it seems to me there's going to be a balance between sending large amounts of very small outputs and getting more frequent payments. So I would expect there'd be some kind of optimal result where you have multiple chains and balancing those two out.
Yeah, definitely. I think right now the average single share payout is something like 0.003 XMR, or maybe 0.003. But yeah, there is a lower bound to the size of an output that you want to generate.
And there's someone like in charge of running those separate blockchains, or it's just like a protocol, and everybody that is running the mining is
everybody who participates has to run their own copy of the P2 pool software. And so that is like another I mean, it has a Stratum server on it, so it's like a pool server. It talks directly to Monero D, so it's like an add-on to a Monero D node.
Great. And what's the incentive for people to do it this way instead of the regular? I know what's the incentive for the Monero network to make it more decentralized, but what is the incentive for people to jump into the P2 pool instead of the regular mining?
Well, you get fees, or you get your rewards paid directly to your wallet, so there's no custodial wallet. There are no transaction fees anywhere, right? So you get your Coinbase payout immediately. There's no pool fee, there's no tax or anything on it.
So all things equal is more profit, basically.
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks.
I do have a question. How do you determine multiple chains on, like multiple pools on the P2P pool software?
Well, each side chain is independent, right? And the only thing that matters is who's first to find the main chain block.
So you define a particular chain that you're going to join?
Yes, there's a config file that just says, here's my chain name, and anybody else who configures the same chain name will be on the same side chain as you.
Okay, so if you wanted a different chain name, then you would have a different side chain.
Yes.
And effectively a different pool.
Yes.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad we got all those good questions, and thank you, HYC, for just answering them back to back to back. None of them came in through the watchers, though. So if you have any questions, make sure you get those in, and we can pass those along. Any other final comments or questions on P2 pool at the moment, or should we move on to some other things? All right. Well, I think everyone's excited that this is something that is, 3% doesn't sound like that much, but it's still brand new and it is working well, and it's pretty substantial. Like it's very cool to see people adopt this, because it does substantially assist with decentralization. Because centralized mining pools are like kind of something you just kind of have to deal with in the past, but now it's good that people have a good option that you can reliably earn blocks from now, right? So you
That's
can
right.
actually mine a block every so often. Plowsoft, I want to turn it to you because you made a really interesting tool recently that Andres is probably very grateful for, that allows people to pretty easily host. I mean, I don't want to call it the equivalent to the CCS, but they're able to host a fundraising page where people can donate for certain things. Can you talk about what you did and sort of why you decided to make a fundraiser page that works with Monero?
Yeah, of course. Well, if any of you have been following the CCS of Monarujo, it ended basically. Monarujo wanted to go their own way for funding, and there was nothing for them really. They had to basically just update the amounts of donations in a Reddit thread manually, like once a month or so. So I seen that and thought, yeah, because I've done some other work on alerts for donations to the general fund. I knew I could make something simple for them to show donations in live real time, and yeah, so I just went ahead and I didn't reinvent the wheel or anything. I just used things that we already have, like the Monero RPC wallet sends a notification every time we get an amount received, and I basically just used that to run a Python script to upload a text file, which the websites display with JavaScript, and that was it really. Yeah, and the guys over at Monarujo, M204, took the idea, adapted it slightly, made some cool changes to the user interface, displaying QR images and stuff like that. And yeah, that's what they have now. That looks really nice.
Andres, can you speak about why you decided to go this route instead of the CCS?
Yes. Sorry, I was just copy and pasting. Yeah, my brain is not so good at multitasking. Yeah, this was how long? I mean, like a month or something ago, at least a couple of weeks. And basically, we started doing the CCS route for specifically for the Psychic project. The Psychic project, if somebody doesn't know about it, is like it's a project to make like a companion app for Monero, or it could be used with other wallets if those wallets decide to, which basically acts like a ledger. It's actually the same protocol as a ledger. So your wallet thinks that it's a ledger, which is connected to. And the interesting thing about this companion app is that you install that in a separate phone, ideally a phone that you don't use anymore or that is kept offline all the time. And then it works basically as a hardware wallet. You start the other one, it keeps your sys safe, and you use that with Monero. And it was it is quite a big project. It demanded a lot of time. Basically, we'll be working on that for I think from the beginning of the year, something like that. The developer M2049er was working on that. So it was like a weird, crazy idea that he had. And he worked many months on the proof of concept, basically to be able to know if the whole thing will work. And when we saw that it actually worked, and it actually works, I've used it myself. We decided to ask for funding for the rest of the project, which is basically make it friendly and test it a lot. In this particular project, compared to some other features that we added to Monero in the past, we thought, and I still believe that it was very important to make it very polished, and also to have a lot of material like auxiliary materials, how-tos, videos, and really, and not only that, really have the combination between the code and the UX nailed down from the beginning, because since it's like a security critical part of it, but everything is security critical in a in a cryptocurrency wallet. But this was even more so because the people incentivized to use this as people that have more than, I don't know, $3 of Monero's worth. So it was a lot of pressure, and we make an estimate of the project, and we ask for that originally through the CCS. That's where we come to. Now we don't have like a prepared statement from the Monero team or something. I can give you my my own thoughts about it, just in case. But the thing is that it was kind of weird because we started talking about. I mean, we made up the official proposal and we put that on GitHub, and there you have our estimates for the times. For the time they will take, and on our hourly estimates, we are 3 of us in the project, which work in different parts of the world with different needs, and and we make an estimate. We make an hourly rate, and we divided the whole thing. And it was quite positive thing because from the start we had a lot of good support from the community. Everybody was super interested in the whole thing and happy about it, and asked for more details on it and for timelines and all that. So we thought there was quite a good start for it. It looks so good so far. But the thing that we had then was that basically the thing got stuck somehow in the approval process. I don't know if everybody is familiar with how the CCS works. Basically, you make a proposal and then like there is a window of opportunity for people to jump in or chime in and say, well, I like this thing, I don't like this, please make some changes to this, to some stuff. And it was all overwhelming positive. Some people ask about or have concerns about the hourly rate, and at the moment we address those and we say, yeah, we could do it like this, because Monero volatility is right in the middle all the time. From the time that we made the proposal to the moment that we publish it, already changed. But so we adjusted that, and then it remained like that for an entire week or something like that without any notice. I remember that I even commented myself on I think on the Matrix room something about it, like what is it happening, and it wasn't a clear answer. It was like an unofficial again vote about it. It's like who thinks the proposal should be merged as it is, and mostly everybody said yeah I'd rather have it merged, and nothing happening yet. Anyway, so
Sounds very
we
much like the CCS. Yeah.
yeah, sounds like this, yes. But and it wasn't in bad blood or anything. So we just decided, like, we had this idea like in the back of our heads from before about what if we ask for money ourselves, and it was just like a mix of things, right? Because I remember we saw Plowsoft's software that was used for Monero Chan or something like that. It was to vote for artwork to be done or something like that. So we thought, yeah, maybe we could. Is the beauty of open source. Maybe we can just copy the damn thing
Yeah,
and
you guys jumped
make
on
it
that right
ours.
away. I mean, the Monero Chan thing is very much a 4chan art,
Yeah.
whatever thing. But I noticed they put up a funding page, and you guys ran with the idea very shortly after. So you seemed to really like it initially.
Because I'm not lying here. It was actually made in a day.
That's awesome. That's
The
the
hard work
best.
the hard work was done, but we discussed about it, and we say, well, what are we going to do? It's like, well, I mean, we could do it this way, or just forget about the CCS and leave it there if people want to donate. And we saw the other thing. I mean, M saw the other thing, and he said, we can like basically fork this or copy this or merge and squash this and whatever you say in GitHub, and it was just like that. And then was like a whole day of, well, but we should put like a better logo on it. Yeah, we should change the colors. No, you should have like QR codes. Everybody was so excited. Um, eventually it's turned out to be a total failure because we haven't raised the money
No.
in that regards. But it was so fun, and I don't see that as a failure at all. I mean, I don't see why we are going to go back to the other way. Not with Monero at least, or not for the present time, because it started like a way to put Psychic back on the map, or make it even more transparent for people. But it turned out to be very interesting as well to to see, or to get feedback from users about the new features that they want, which is something that I get message on Twitter, on Reddit. People ask for stuff, everything, like when dark mode, when something, and it's all spurs. But here is a very transparent way of seeing, not so much of the. It is a way for the community to see how much effort goes into different kind of projects, because it's always useful to see, but also for us to see how many. I know that not every transaction is a different people, is a different person, but it's somehow telling. Like, for example, perhaps in some projects you have less transactions or less donations, but bigger amounts. Um, I'm making this out, right? But example, you say like, this is a feature for whales to save Moneros, and then you see like 3 transactions of 10 Moneros each, and it makes sense. And some other stuff that maybe it's not that important, but people ask a lot, like a true dark black pitch black mode, and you have several like of 0.001 Moneros, and you can tell that, yeah, there is, and we use that. I mean, we use that internally to think about what should we work next, right, or sooner than later. We like every feature that we put there for one reason or another. It's so bad to ask people for money for stuff that you don't want to do yourself or that you don't believe it. So don't do that, because people are going to fund it, and I will have to do it. But yeah, again, it's fun. I think none of the things that we are put so far has been fully funded. They are very cheap things. People go in and donate. They're very cheap things to be worked. We are still working on the stuff anyway, and the sooner they are being made, they will be released. But it will be interesting. I am very interested about seeing this, like how it plays on the long run.
Yeah, I'm interested too. It's definitely something to keep an eye on. And I'm glad that there's an easy option out there that took you only a day to shove together.
Yeah.
So that's good to hear. Thank you, Plausoff, for making a good base that someone could
Thank
use
you,
for a
Browser.
day.
No problem. I also just want to plug another project using the list. Also shows the benefits of multiple, like tiny amounts for specific things. XMR radio. They have like a giant list,
Yes.
like ranging from like $10 for like small items, equipments, peripherals, things like that, all the way up to like 6 Moneros for track acquisition, things like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So look, already got broad ecosystem adoption.
Yeah. This is the decentralization episode, right? Because we already talked about peer-to-pool, and now it's like decentralization funding. So we are a bit late for the critical decentralization party. That I think it was the theme of 2 years ago. But yeah, it's working. And we are working on a so far secret feature of the funding.
Ooh,
I won't say anything else more, but maybe it will be fun and interesting to spice things up again.
we will keep an eye out for that. Okay, so I have a few other major topics I need to cover today. First of all, I want to talk about the transaction increase over the last month or two, whatever it was. So there's very inorganic increase in Monero's transactions, and you looked at it in the chart, and you're like, okay, well, where is this coming from, right? Because sure, Monero's adoption is generally doing pretty well and it looks nice, but this is like a 2x increase out of nowhere, right? So we're all like, what's going on? And now it's kind of back down to what it was before. And so if you've been following the Monero Research Lab channel, you should see that, or you should have seen that a lot of people are believing that this was very much not just organic growth that was caused by one or like one entity or group of entities. So I just wanted to open the floor on that. I don't know if Ko, if you had any comments on that, or Arctic Mind, just on this sort of behavior. We do all know that, like, going back to Monero Research Lab paper 1 and then further enhanced by MRL4, that an attacker spamming a bunch of outputs is one potential way to learn about transactions. Although with Monero's current ring size of 11, that's kind of hard in practice, but it's just something to keep an eye on. So I just wanted to sort of open the floor. Again, if you have comments, you can put those on YouTube too, about the out of nowhere, probably caused by one or entity or the like, or at least there's some evidence just that supports it being conducted by one entity as to why this might have been the case.
I think it's two things to look here. I mean, you got to look at the long-term trend, and then you got to look at the fluctuations. And the fluctuations, yeah, I mean, you could possibly see an exchange that's sort of releasing transactions with a certain particular cycle, and you see a symmetry to that. And that would easily, if it's a large enough exchange, could easily change the transaction rate. So, for example, on a, say, a 24, 48-hour basis, that kind of thing. And this is the kind of fluctuations that we're seeing. I mean, we are seeing fluctuations that are quite significant. Nothing close to what you would need to do any kind of chain de-anonymization of ring signatures. You need about 10 or 15 times the transaction rate to do that in any kind of meaningful way. But I will say it could well be the major exchanges that are doing it. That would be my immediate theory. It's unclear that it's a spam attack in any particular way. Someone's trying to test, but that's a lot of spam. Even it's about half the number of transactions. So that my take is it could well be major exchanges. If I was going to look at a centralized entity doing it.
Ko, did you have any comments, or did you look into this situation at all, or is this something that mostly RuckDM has been championing?
I've been looking at it only like as an observer, kind of from the side. So I guess they kind of feel like it was definitely from some single entity, and that it might have been malicious, but the fact that they didn't go to 10x like Arctic Mind says probably implies that they were doing some kind of research, maybe a research into how to do an attack, or research into how to do an attack, either with the expectation of in the future doing a malicious attack, or perhaps in the future writing a paper and publishing it as like a scientist or whatever. But my general take is that since our current volume is below the minimum penalty free zone, we kind of like we can accept that there can be volume increases like this, because there's no engineering in the protocol to try to prevent it when our current volume is below the minimum penalty free zone. So it's like, this is a possibility that we accepted, I guess, implicitly or even explicitly in the design, or not necessarily me, but Arctic Mind and the people that came before him in this design process kind of accepted. So I'm personally not worried about it. If we have problems after volume exceeds the minimum penalty free zone, that would be much more like intriguing, I guess.
It's a good point. I mean, the when you're in the below the penalty free zone, you're effectively no different with, say, Litecoin, where you have a block and a minimum node relay fee, which of course there is a cost in the minimum node relay fee. So that's basically the position we are in right now. And the point that the interesting thing is if it's actually done as a malicious attack, in order for it to be effective, it has to be significantly higher to try to de-anonymize the chain, and it has to be sustained for a period of time. You need well, assuming we stay with 10, you're going to need roughly the ring size, or maybe a bit more. If you go, say, if we increase the ring size, and then just simply increases the amount. The other problem with this type of de-anonymization attack, of course, is that there is the potential for a counter attack on the community side, and simply if everybody starts throwing spam, then the whole thing's not going to work anyway. So it's not. I mean, it's a possibility. It could be some sort of research or on a malicious attempt. I am more in the field that it could just be a big exchange, how they process transactions and release them, etc., with a cycle that is impacting it. That's the other possibility that we have to consider. It's definitely something that's quite, you see the up and down, so there's sort of a predictable frequency. On top of the actual overall upward trend. So there is a sort of a micro trend, which is definitely doing something. There could be a signal in there. But a big exchange could easily do that just in the normal course of business. If they have a fair amount of transaction volume, just how they handle transactions or and how they cycle them could easily create an impact like that. So it's, one can say it's a specific entity, but Go's point is a good point. We don't have actual penalty pricing right now, and we can't until you hit basically about 2 to 3 times the current transaction rate, which would then put us right at the 300,000 byte limit. And then, of course, there's this penalty pricing. And what that could do, actually, is if you are in exchange, for example, again, is you may have to smooth out your transaction behavior, because otherwise you're going to pay higher fees. So there will be an incentive to smooth your transaction behavior out if you're a large player. Simply, otherwise, you're just going to end up paying the penalty fees. So that's the other element that you have in there. But I mean, I agree with Go. I mean, I think it's just something that if we suspect it's a centralized entity, when it hits the 300,000 bytes, which is a matter of time, I would say probably within a year or a year and a half, then there's either going to be an increase in cost, they're going to have to pay a higher fee to do this, or they're going to have to smooth it out.
I was hoping to have either Isthmus or Rucknium on today, but neither can make it. So they've been alluding that this report will come out. The initial report on their findings will come out in the next few days. They said a few days ago, so who knows when it'll come out. So hopefully soon. Any other quick comments on this before we move on to the fun Triptych, Seraphis, Atlantis, Spark stuff?
Good on that topic.
All right. So, Co, you pretty much have the floor here. So most people who are watching Monero Meet are probably familiar with Triptych, at least as a general idea, because we've talked about this over the last several months as something Monero might consider. But given the complexities with implementing multisig for Triptych, generally people have sort of waned away from wanting to implement Triptych on Monero. And so that opens the door to more recent research that is iterating on a lot of the past stuff. One of that is Atlantis Spark. This is something that the Firo team has helped develop, but it's open code. We could do, in the Monero ecosystem, we could do whatever we want with it. And you are making a more broad, take a step back, design architecture type thing called Seraphis. So could you describe to the people who are listening right now, what is Seraphis? What is Atlantis Spark? Why might they be interesting to Monero? And what's, the broad differences between the two?
Okay, so Seraphis, Atlantis, and Atlantis Spark are transaction protocols. You can think of them, broadly speaking, as like the next generation of transaction protocols after ring-CT, which came after CryptoNote. So I suppose the critical difference between ring-CT and these new protocols is that the new protocols involve a redesign of key images. And this redesigning key images allows us to kind of extract proofs about key images out of the proofs about where your outputs that you're spending come from. So the membership proof that shows that when you're spending an output, it comes from the ledger. And of course, in Monero and so on, we have these ring signatures that say we're spending something from a small set of outputs that exist in the ledger. So since this kind of membership proof structure is so complicated with ring signatures, any effort to simplify those structures has advantages in terms of the performance and size of those proofs. So membership proofs in Lulantis, Spark, and Surface can be simpler than in Triptych, for example. Even if you're using the same kind of proofs system between the two protocols, the proof system as applied to Surface and Spark would be simpler. So that's one advantage of these new protocols over Triptych. Another advantage is that the way you construct outputs can be more arbitrary. So since the proofs about your outputs that you're spending are divorced from the proofs about their membership within the ledger, you can make more complicated statements about those outputs. And this means you can construct recipient addresses that are recorded in outputs, so the one-time addresses. You can construct these in more complicated ways that have beneficial properties. So this is where we get to the part about how multisig in Triptych is somewhat problematic from an implementation standpoint compared to how we have it currently in RingCT. So in Triptych, we have these key images that, since the proofs about the key images are embedded in membership proofs, there's very strict limitations about what kind of key image you can have. And the effect of this is that it's much more difficult to have a membership proof in Triptych than RingCT. But since in these new protocols, the proofs about the key images are extracted from the membership proofs, we can now have multisig that is just as simple as it is currently in RingCT. Beyond that, by separating these proofs, there are several other properties that we can get. So by separating the proofs, you can actually construct the proofs separately. So one thing you can do is you can construct a proof that says I'm spending an output, but you don't immediately create the proof that says it exists in the ledger. So you can delay creating the membership proof until later, after you've signed and said I'm going to spend this output. So you can actually make a signature saying you're spending an output that doesn't even exist in the ledger yet, because you don't have to make the membership proof yet. So you can make a proof spending an output that was created by a transaction that has not been added to the ledger. And then after that transaction has been added to the ledger, you can create your membership proof saying, hey, I'm spending this output that exists in this transaction. And then after that, you can submit your original transaction to the network, and then it's added. So you get this chaining of transactions that's out of order compared to when they're added to when these transactions are added to the ledger. So my understanding is that this kind of out of order transaction chaining is is helpful for atomic swaps, where if you want to make an offer with Monero for Bitcoin, you can't do that without transaction chaining. So right now, in atomic swaps, your only UX is you make an offer with Bitcoin for Monero, and then the Monero holder comes and completes the offer. But with transaction chaining, you can get the opposite as well. Hypothetically, that's my understanding. Another benefit to having these proofs separated is the key images themselves can be constructed using only some view key material. So you can actually identify when an output is spent using view key material without needing knowledge of your private spend key in the wallet. So you can have some kind of view only wallet that sees spent outputs, which is something that we
I just see
wanted
our
for Ring
face being
CT.
like, yes.
Something we wanted for Ring CT, but all the ideas we had were like not really practical. You can also have even more tiers of wallet permissions. So you could have a tier of wallet that only identifies received outputs without reading the amounts. Then you could have a second tier which views amounts in received outputs and views outputs that have been spent. Then a third tier that allows you to spend those outputs. So you could have a hardware wallet and then your local phone wallet, and then a third wallet that's scanning the ledger for you to find outputs that you own. And so there's a bunch of different combinations of wallet permission tiers enabled by this kind of modularity and separation of proofs. So if we want to pursue these new protocols, there's actually a big decision that has to be made about what kind of new addresses to use. New address. Let me think. Oh yeah, regarding the funding that we were discussing earlier, crowdfunding. Ruknium mentioned how in BCH, Bitcoin Cash, they have this funding system where you collaboratively fund a transaction. So you have this transaction proposal that pays outputs to the fund requester or whatever, and then people can contribute outputs, spent outputs to that transaction, and only when enough funds have been assembled can the transaction be submitted. And so by having modular or separation of proofs, you can have separate, let's see, I guess technically you can do this in Ring CT, but since we don't have the implementation yet, or not yet, but we don't have that implementation, we can't do it. But you can have, by separating proofs, you can have the statement that I spend an output, you can have separate statements that aren't connected to each other. Then you lump them together into a transaction before submitting it. So this kind of allows you to contribute funds without, and then later remove those funds from the transaction if you change your mind before it gets fully funded. So that's kind of an interesting side note, I guess. So the differences between the Serapis and Lelentus Spark, my understanding is there's only, from a practical standpoint, there's probably only minor differences. They are very similar protocols. They were kind of, the original idea that inspired them was this idea of proof separation that myself and Aram came up with independently, but around the same time. And then so we kind of, after that, we kind of had a lot of discussion to figure out the new key images, or how to construct key images so that they work well with this proof separation. So we have a lot of overlap, I guess. The previous, or last week, Spark and Seraphis were, or from my point of view, they were equivalent. But after a recent protocol fix to a problem that was encountered, there's been a little divergence. But overall, they're very similar. In practice, there might be slight verification or size differences, although I'm still in the process of building prototypes to actually do performance testing and so on. But yeah, there aren't too many differences too. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ko. Does anyone have questions for him on what is, what's going on in this sort of research? I mean, it's so new, I would say that, and like the Land to Spark paper is now out for people to review, and that has all the security proofs in it. Although, of course, they needed to make the change so that people with the view key couldn't burn other people's funds, which is a very important security feature that was not covered in the original version. So clearly, these things need some extra review, but ultimately, they have very good promise, I'd say, to improve Monero. The consequences, Ko said, is that you would need new Monero receiving addresses to continue using this improvement. But any questions from anyone else here on Monero Meet on what the Lattice Spark and Seraphis are?
No, I just have one. In the case of that possible feature that where you could gather a lot of funds and it doesn't unlock until you reach the threshold, kind of like a Kickstarter thing. What happened with the funds if you don't reach that threshold? They just remain stuck.
The funds are just outputs you own. They're just normal outputs, and then you say, I'm going to spend this, and then you send a proof to the funder or fundee, and then they hold on to this proof and submit it later once they have enough to fill the balance of the transaction. So you could just make another transaction with that output before the funding up or transaction is submitted. But one problem I noticed with this is the fundee could just fill the transaction with their own funds to get like some fraction that was funded by other people. So it's kind of has that risk to it.
Interesting point. Yeah, it's good to think about that ahead of time.
Yeah, but it's also interesting that you can take your donations back. I mean, in any moment up to the moment when they're fully funded.
As long as
promise. It's like
I had it real quick. I had a question that came in. I just want to make sure we address it. So, we had two questions. One, is the setting delay of 20 blocks, it's not actually 20 blocks, it's 10 blocks in Monero, obsolete? Well, at the moment, the answer is obviously no, but if we went the Lattice Spark direction, for example, would that move us to make it obsolete? And number two, can you talk about the address scheme variants in Seraphis?
The 10 block lock time is kind of a permanent. I feel like it's a permanent feature of having reference of having anonymous reference proofs. So the big problem is that if you try to make a transaction that references an output that is 1 block old, and then the chain gets reorged, the last 10 blocks get reorged, and suddenly the output you reference is in a different spot. So now your membership proof, your reference proof is invalidated and your transaction gets dumped. So in the reorg zone of like 10 blocks, as we have assumed, you have this big risk of your transactions just getting dumped at random. And they can easily be, this is an easy attack vector by malicious miners or just malicious transaction authors who intentionally try to force reorgs, which happen already as like a natural behavior of the system. So I think the 10 block lock time is permanent. unless you move to something like Stellar, the Stellar Consensus Protocol, which is way, way different from Proof of Work, but it doesn't have this 10-block lock time. I also think it's unlikely we'll ever move to that with Monero, but there are cryptocurrencies out there that use it. The second question was more about the address schemes. So there's like seven or eight different like combinations of permissions. So it's kind of like plug and play with what you want your permissions structure to be. So there's a few different like things that your permission tiers can do. You can identify owned outputs. You can read amounts encrypted inside those outputs or any encrypted memos. You can see if your output is subject to a Janus attack. You can see outputs that you have spent, and you can spend owned outputs. So these 5 things are you can kind of mix and match amongst 3 different permission tiers. With the bottom one is always your spend tier, but you can kind of shift around those permissions between the different tiers as you desire. More or less, there's some restrictions.
Thank you, Ko. Arctic Mind, did you have something?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about another question, and that's to do with the. Well, first of all, I know that Ko is working on getting the transaction size and verification times, etc. in order. When we talk about the real problem, and especially the 10 transaction limit, there, of course, there is the possibility that someone could actually, if I understand correctly, submit it right at the end. They could add. They could still have a sort of parent base for, child base for parent situation at one point in the process, if I'm not mistaken. If that could still be done. That was kind of my question. You could still do it at one point in the process.
I'm not quite sure what you're talking about.
Like have a situation where one transaction, the parent pays for the child. So the child pays for the parent, like you can do in Bitcoin, for example.
Maybe, I don't know. I just realized one thing you can do with this, with these new protocols, is you can delegate your membership proof to the recipient of the transaction. So you can make a transaction that spends an output in the last 10 blocks, and then you can give the membership proof and the partial transaction with your signatures authorizing fund transfer to the recipient, and then once the 10 blocks have passed, they can immediately make the membership proof and submit the transaction to the network. However, this leaks the true spends of your transaction to the recipient. But I guess that's one approach.
So you would lose your privacy on the rings, essentially.
With the
for that
counterparty, not
method,
with the public.
Yeah, but just to the person who's receiving the transaction, yes. Yeah, because they would have to reconstruct the ring structure themselves to submit it.
Right.
Yeah, so they would see the ring structure in order to submit the proof.
They could choose their own ring, or they would have to choose their own ring.
Yeah, but they would know what the true spend is. Yeah.
Yep.
Just real quick, we're over. So, I want to quickly thank everyone for coming here. Thank you, Plowsoft. Thank you, HYC, Arctic Mind, Ko, Andres. It's great having you all. Thanks everyone who watched here. Also, I do think we should probably just add one or so more questions for Ko before we get out of here. But I do think it's good that we had these. We should have another one another month. So thanks everyone for joining us. A lot of very interesting developments to talk about in the last month. So Cole, I guess real quick, what are the next steps then for Reliant to Spark and Seraphis? What's going on next? What can the community, besides just watching the Monero Research Lab channel, what can the community do to stay updated with these things?
Well, I have my. Right now I'm working on performance mockups for both protocols and for all the variations in the protocols, so we can actually see how different design choices affect the transaction size and verification times. So you can follow my branch if you want. I've been working on it for the past few weeks, maybe a month even. I don't know. So when that's done, that'll be cool to have some nice graphs. But there's so many variations; it's just driving me crazy. Other than that, I've been just talking in the research lab channel. What was the other question?
I guess so.
What was the other
Yeah,
question?
I think you kind of answered both of them. One was how do people
Uh-oh.
keep updated, and two, what are the next steps from your perspective? And
Right, next steps. So I want to keep working on this, or get this performance stuff done. So that'll go in the efficiency section of the Seraphis paper, and also the security model and proofs are being worked on by Coin Student 2048, who you can find in the. I guess if anyone wants to help with that, they could ask Coin Student where he's at and if he needs a hand with anything.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for all this. For people who are interested in Atlanta Spark, Monero Talk recently had an interview with Aram and Sarang, so that'll probably be out the next few days. So you can see them walking through. Those are the two co-authors. And of course, Co was acknowledged in that paper also. So those three people are really knowledgeable in this space. So it's good to have such good interest here. But again, thank you everyone for joining the Monero Meet this week. Thank you HYC. Thank you Arctic Mine on today's
Thank you.
off. It was a great pleasure having you here. We didn't even cover everything that's happened over the last 2 months, so we have plenty of other to talk about. But yeah, take the orange pill, people. Take the orange pill. Get Monero.org. All right. Bye, everybody.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.